Hi friends, this is Mithilesh. Today I am going to discuss the topic poetry. Poetry is a major topic from our story section. My intention is to discuss today here poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling. It is said by William Wordsworth. Poetry is divided in three kinds. This is poetry and it is divided in three kinds. One is the narrative poetry, other is descriptive poetry, and third is the expository poetry. Okay friends, this is the narrative poetry. Narrative poetry means a poetry which we can discuss about the poetry like the epic, Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and others. What is actually narrative poetry? Narrative poetry means a kind of poem which is to be written uh, on the basics of some story. For example, Ramayana is an epic which is written in the name of King Dashrath and his sons. So, narrative poetry is basically written on a story. Then, after finishing the narrative poetry, for example, the epic Ramayana. Epic Ramayana is an example of narrative poetry. Example of narrative poetry. Let me discuss about the descriptive poetry. What is a descriptive poetry? Friends, a descriptive poetry, we are just going to explain descriptive. This is the descriptive poetry. Descriptive poetry means we have to take sources from nature, atmosphere or atmosphere. Atmosphere. And second one is our imagination. Imagination. Second one is the imagination. When we combine both things, suppose that somebody has taken example from nature and imagine something, that is called descriptive type of poetry. Most of the poems have been written like descriptive poetry. For example, Robert Frost, an American writer, American poet, has written the poem Stopping by Woods in the Snowy Evening. In this poem, the last four lines of the poem is that the wood are lovely dark and deep, the wood are lovely dark and deep, but I have promised to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. The poet is comparing about the nature. He is comparing about wood here. He is comparing the life struggle. Is discuss about the life is full of struggle. I mean, this is a study about nature, and this is the poet's imagination. That is what the combination of the nature and the imagination are studied in descriptive poetry. Now, friends, we are just going to discuss um, expository poetry. What is an expository poetry? Expository expository poetry. Expository poetry is the combination of both the narrative and descriptive. Descriptive. Narrative means you already know that it is totally based on a story, and descriptive it is the discussion of some natural resources or atmosphere, atmosphere, imagination. It is the combination of both. I mean, in expository poetry, there's a story like Ramayana, there's some description. Both are the combination of the poetry. Friends, today we are going to discuss few things about poetry. For example, now we will discuss the poetry about sonnet. Today we are going to discuss about sonnet. What is a sonnet? Sonnet, the sonnet. Sonnet is a kind of song. Sonnet, sonnet is a kind of song written in 14 lines. For example, the origin of sonnet is uh, 13th century. Kinds of sonnets. Kinds of sonnets. Sonnets are Italian sonnet, Italian, Italian sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet. Third is the Spenserian sonnet, Spenserian sonnet, and fourth is the Petrarchan sonnet and Italian sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet, Spenserian sonnet, and Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespearean sonnet. Each of the sonnets, each of the sonnets have been written in different era. For example, we are just going to discuss about the English sonnet or a Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespearean sonnet. This is the Shakespearean example. We are just going to discuss about the Shakespearean sonnet. It is also written in 14 lines. Each line of the sonnet has 5 feet. 5 feet. Each line of the sonnet